What is an actual truth that appears to be a conspiracy theory? Story 1. Militarized dolphins. There was plenty of training and research on both sides in the Cold War on whether dolphins and other marine creatures could have military usages, such as defending ships, locating lost divers, attaching homing devices for torpedoes, etc. With the fall of the Soviet Union, the Dolphin program in the USSR passed to the Ukrainian Navy and was ultimately sold to Iran. Military dolphins have seen a resurgence since the annexation of Crimea, and it seems Russia is reinvesting in military dolphins. It should also be noted that militarized dolphins act as guard dogs for a good chunk of the U.S. nuclear stockpiles. Story 2. They did in fact put chemicals in the water that turn the freaking frogs gay. It's called atrazine. It's an herbicide. When ingested, it is an endocrine disruptor. It is directly correlated to insanely high cancer rates in Pekin, Illinois. It also causes hormonal imbalance in frogs, making males mate as if they were females. I'm sure Monsanto loved it becoming a meme. Story 3. It's possible everybody has allergies these days, partially because of how trees were planted since the arbor movement started in the mid-20th century. Basically, mostly male trees have been planted because there was a backlash against female trees, which drop fruit and seed pods and make a mess of people's pretty lawns, city streets, and landscape gardens and lawns for businesses and industrial parks. Municipalities didn't want to clean up the mess, and so it was suggested that while planting trees for a green future was good, we should only plant male trees because they only shed pollen. And now look at how many weird allergies we have. Story 4. That, yes, the US government is in fact controlled to a significant extent by very wealthy people who are able to force their wants and needs onto the system. Example. The medical industrial complex doesn't want the US having universal health care. They donate money to election campaigns, lobbyist organizations, and the like, and universal health care never gets done. Story 5. American petroleum companies like ExxonMobil conducted internal scientific research about their products and found that they would induce global warming and would irrevocably harm the planet. They downplayed the findings and instead funneled money to third-party organizations to cast doubt on the idea of global warming as a false alarmist mindset that only crazy people believe in. Story 6. Donald Trump worked with Russia to try and rig the 2016 election in his favor. His son met with Russian agents in Trump Tower and agreed to the plan. Trump's longtime friend Roger Stone then worked with Julian Assange to coordinate releases of materials from the FSB that were targeted and timed to influence public perceptions. Then, as President Trump committed 10 counts of obstruction of justice to successfully impede the investigation, to which the lead investigator, while being constrained from saying he's guilty, reported he was not innocent. Story 7. Rich people going to private islands to do strange rituals and then said owner of one of those islands, who was also gifted a multi-million-dollar home from the owner of Victoria's Secret, takes himself out after being jailed. There's no foul play, no video. Guards have no answer. People are shocked. There's a huge list of people that flew on this owner's jet, but it's totally not related to whatever strange rituals and things that may or may have not been happening over there for decades. Story 8. U.S. government mercenaries were running stolen guns out of Libya into Syria from a rented storefront in Benghazi. The entire operation was directed by Ambassador Stevens, as it was his idea. The weapons were being stolen from Gaddafi's pals, and they eventually found out about the operation. The entire Gang of Eight knew about and approved the gun-running operation from the beginning. After the crap went down, the majority members of the Gang of Eight pinned the death of 4 Americans on Clinton. The Obama administration lied about the Arab awakening being the cause of the killings. This LIE and the chaos it caused in Tripoli gave the dozens of Americans and American allies that were part of the gun-running operation just enough time to get out of Libya before they were discovered. This was all part of the testimony at the Benghazi hearings. Even though all of the testimony was available, the media kept some of the testimony under wraps because similar operations were still ongoing. Enough voters pinned the death of 4 Americans on Clinton to cost her the election, even though the Arab awakening lie that she told saved dozens more American lives. Story 9. Before the atomic bombs were dropped on Japan, the top contender for mass destruction and ending the war on the Pacific Front in 1945 was dropping empty shells filled with bats, carrying vials of napalm on timers to burn as many buildings as possible. I am not completely sure, but I believe this project was the origin of the current form of napalm. Story 10. Evidence was planted in the O.J. Simpson case. Yes, he was guilty, and it wasn't the glove that was planted, probably not anyway. But the preponderance of the evidence suggests that at least two pieces of evidence were planted by the police to try to enhance their case. The blood on the back gate. Blood was collected from the crime scene the day after the murders, and much of it had severely degraded DNA, making the more reliable of two available DNA tests impossible. Then, 11 days after the murders, after the site had been power washed, investigators returned and claimed to have found a DNA-rich blood spot on the back gate. DNA degrades in sunlight, so it should have had less than the other samples, not more. Plus, the blood tested positive for a preservative used in blood collection test tubes, like the test tube OJ's blood sample was stored in. And a picture taken the day after the murders didn't show the spot on the gate. There are other ways the preservative could get in the blood, and it wasn't a conclusive picture, but it's all very suspicious. The bloody socks. Investigators claim to have found socks near OJ's bed at his house and claim that the victim's blood was on the socks. The problem? A video taken of the room before the socks were collected showed no socks on the floor, and the blood had seeped through from one side of the sock to the other, which isn't possible if the blood hit it when someone's foot was in the sock. It looked more like someone put the sock down flat and dripped blood onto it. There are all sorts of other instances of shady behavior by the police and criminologists. There's a pattern. One of the cops even took a pair of OJ's shoes home with him. Story 11. On the 17th of December, 1967, Harold Holt, the 17th Prime Minister of Australia, disappeared while swimming in the sea near Portsea, Victoria. Despite massive efforts, his body was never recovered. However, it is generally agreed that Holt's disappearance was a simple case of an accidental drowning, but it's easy to see why there are plenty of conspiracies surrounding a prime minister just disappearing during the modern era. Many years ago, I was living on the south coast of Western Australia. I happened to be in the backyard and saw a snake come in through the back gate. I was a city boy and did not know anything about snakes, but I was worried because we had a toddler. So I went and got the neighbor who grew up in the bush. He came over with a shovel and looked around a bit. Then he turned to me and said, "Joe Blake has done a Harold Holt," which was very funny once he had explained Cockney rhyming slang and the political history of Australia. Story 12. There's so many of these in regards to food. The newest one I heard from all the mom groups was that rice-based baby cereals have dangerous amounts of arsenic. The study I ended up reading on this indicated very high concentrations in rice-based cereals and crackers, and showed a correlation between IQ loss and consumption of rice cereals at a young age. The EU and America are currently considering just banning them. Story 13. Basically anything the Dulles brothers are accused of doing, they likely did, or that John Wayne likely died as a result of cancer caused by nuclear radiation he was exposed to while filming The Conqueror. John Wayne played Genghis Khan in the movie. Apparently, they were filming near a nuclear test site, and the American government told them it was safe, LOL. Tragically, a lot of people working on that film got cancer. Story 14. Gerrymandering. This is when political parties redraw district boundaries to give their candidates an unfair advantage. It's not just a plot from a political thriller, it's a real and widespread practice that manipulates election outcomes. The worst part is how it undermines fair representation, making it harder for voters to have a genuine voice in who represents them. It's frustrating to see how this tactic is used to secure power rather than reflect the true will of the people. Saddening, but it's true. Story 15. The U.S. is run by a corporate oligarchy, and the global power elite exists as a class of themselves for themselves. They have complete class solidarity and see the rest of us, even the upper middle class, as cattle. We do not have any real say in our politics or how our society is run, and both the Democratic and Republican candidates are corporate picks and ultimately serve as puppets for their desires. Even the media is not free, and the majority of them serve as mouthpieces for the elite. You think the New York Times is unbiased? Sure, Jan. Story 16. Hitler survived and worked in the shadows for years. Not entirely unreasonable considering the only ones that found his body were the Russians who allegedly removed it. And I'm not sure if anyone else outside of the Soviets ever saw the cadaver at any point. obviously a conspiracy theory, contrary to this thread, but not an entirely outlandish one. Also, a local student went missing at college, and his body wasn't found for months. There was no evidence whatsoever of how he went missing, and his body had zero signs of trauma, poisoning, asphyxiation, etc. Basically, it's like he vanished. A lot of people said he fell into an alternate dimension backroom style and just popped up dead from some sort of freak event. People spun a conspiracy theory that his actual cause of death was covered up, or perhaps he never died at all. This one guy theorized that he was captured as a government test subject, and a shocking amount of locals and students backed this. However, the medical examination report was leaked and someone got a hold of some of the crime scene photos, so this was debunked. Story 17. An American lobbying group once helped convince the US government and public to fund and support a group of Angolan anti-communist resistance fighters. They did this after the Angolan government had already decided to abandon communism. Tens of thousands of innocent Angolans died needlessly. The lobbying company was Black, Manafort, Stone, and Kelly. If those names sound familiar, it's because it included Roger Stone and Paul Manafort. Story 18. The Catholic Church invested in land and universities to slowly influence the US government away from its secular independence. Their plot worked, slowly but surely creating an organization that has quietly pushed forward pro-Catholic policies while creating loopholes like granting more power to special interest groups. That plot involved a quiet invasion of their members into lifetime appointments in a single yet useful branch of government. It worked, signified by their recent success in overturning well-established legal precedent, and in the previous term actually had every single possible lifetime appointment filled by one of their members. Story 19. One actual truth that often appears to be a conspiracy theory is the existence of government surveillance programs like the NSA's PRISM program. Before it was publicly exposed by Edward Snowden in 2013, the idea that governments were conducting widespread surveillance on their own citizens was dismissed by many as a conspiracy theory. However, Snowden's revelations confirmed that the US government, through the NSA, was indeed collecting and analyzing vast amounts of data from the communications of ordinary people, often without their knowledge or consent. This truth seemed outlandish to many before the evidence came to light, blurring the line between conspiracy theory and reality. Story 20. Cuba invaded the Dominican Republic, Venezuela, Panama, and Grenada to help spread communism. Some of these invasions were conducted by Cuba alone. Cuba sent over 100K troops to intervene in Angola, spread out over 3 occasions. That's 10x the number of troops the Soviets could be bothered to send. Most countries don't even have that many troops. Cuba was the only communist country ideologically motivated to paint the world red at any cost. The Soviets and Chinese were just pretending for money. Story 21. 10 days prior to the '68 Mexico City Olympics, there were student protests gathered at a square, and the Mexican government sent the military to placate them. However, they also hired secret hitmen who infiltrated a nearby apartment building to purposefully snipe at the military, so as to provoke them into shooting at the students, thinking the shooting was coming from them. Official estimates placed the deaths at 30 to 40, but later estimates in the decades that followed placed it closer to the hundreds. After the incident, they then kept everything hushed, including in the newspapers, so that the Olympics could go forward undisturbed. People wouldn't know about the secret sniper agents until the ruling party that had governed uninterruptedly for 70+ years finally lost, and the new party could unearth classified documents. Story 22. John Lennon was an insecure man who definitely had some paranoid thoughts throughout his life. So when he moved to the US in the 1970s and people would call him, he would warn them that his phones were tapped and that the Nixon administration and the FBI were targeting him specifically because of his politics. He thought people were following him and that they were intentionally messing with his immigration status. He even talked about it in interviews. Years later, after John had died, unsealed FBI records show that the Nixon administration was using the FBI to spy on and target him, including tapping his phone, having him followed, and messing with his immigration records, all due to his political activism. Story 23. The precise line between verified truth and crazy crap is still not really established, but the whole history of NATO's Operation Gladio, the covert anti-communist militias, and misplaced weapons caches secretly planted across Europe who got bored and started instigating false flag left-wing terrorism during the years of lead to justify their oppressive right-wing response. And their ties to the numerous documented Vatican banking scandals and Masonic propaganda doulage, weirdness, and just general fifth column terroristic crap. A lot of it is probably crap, but I promise you more of it is verified fact than you'd think. And a good chunk is being investigated by various EU legislative bodies who I don't know if they ever amounted to anything because I haven't done a deep dive on this in years. But this all is the most new world order crap I have come across that is at least somewhat actual factual. Story 24. The MKUltra program by the CIA. For many years, the idea that the US government was conducting mind control experiments on its citizens sounded like something out of a science fiction novel or a paranoid conspiracy theory. However, it was revealed in the 1970s, through a series of investigations and declassified documents, that the CIA did, in fact, conduct such experiments under the MKUltra program. The program, which began in the 1950s, involved various methods, including administering drugs like LSD, hypnosis, sensory deprivation, and other psychological techniques, often without the consent of the subjects. The aim was to explore the possibilities of mind control for purposes such as interrogation and brainwashing. Many of the records were destroyed, but enough evidence has emerged to confirm that MKUltra was real, and its existence has been acknowledged by the US government. Story 25. Something a bit more local, Bulgaria, a country in Eastern Europe, has the highest ratio of hospitals to population on the continent. Over 400 hospitals for 7-ish million people. Half of those hospitals are in the capital, population 1.5 to 2 million as. Most of those hospitals are fake, never received a single patient. The doctors working there don't know they're under a contract, if they're even in the country or alive for that matter. I know how to make them. You really only need starting capital to rent a building and some equipment and bribe 3 parties, 2 of which are the government. No, I don't know anyone in those positions. And a few other small things. The healthcare system in the country pays a flat rate for available hospital beds if you work with the government healthcare provider. There was a scandal recently related to attempts to fire the director of the country's largest emergency hospital. What was almost never mentioned was the reason for the firing. There were 2 other hospitals located in rented buildings on the emergency hospital's property. Never received a patient. And the guy or people connected to him was on the board of directors for both of them. Story 26. The US government changed the standards around enlisting soldiers in the Vietnam War to allow soldiers who were mostly rejected for failing the intellectual part of the aptitude test. They figured they could use the new technology of VHS tapes to train them so it didn't matter. Called Project 100,000, they died at 3 times the rate of other soldiers. BMW decided to make cars because they got banned from making planes after making them for Germans. Scientologists lead the largest ever infiltration of the US government because they were having problems around their taxes and wanted to steal and destroy documents related to the issue. Operation Snow White. During World War II, due to a shortage of metal, the British tried to build an aircraft out of frozen wood pulp called pykrete, Project Habakkuk. The US told a bunch of people living at Bikini Atoll that were the children of Israel to convince them to leave. They then conducted 24 nuclear weapon tests there. Hemingway was paranoid that the FBI was spying on him. They were because he took money from both them and the KGB to keep an eye on the other. He spent the money on a boat to machine gun sharks from. Polio was eradicated from virtually everywhere on Earth except in remote regions of Pakistan and Afghanistan at the start of 2023. Why were those areas not vaccinated? Because when the CIA was hunting for Osama bin Laden, they posed as vaccinators to get access to those populations and take DNA swabs from them. Since then, over 200 vaccinators have been killed. Also, there's now polio in the Gaza Strip because Israel has destroyed all health infrastructure. The guy who invented modern surgical residencies and many modern surgeries was a cocaine and morphine addict who created the grueling schedule to try and cover up his addictions. His name was William Stewart Halstead. Some guy sold 52 million pounds of bomb detectors to the Iraqi government. Unfortunately for them, the 8651 is a rebadged golf ball detector that doesn't even work for that. An actor playing Ronald McDonald was once detained by the police because of a company policy that doesn't allow actors to admit their identity outside of Ronald McDonald. He got in a car accident and refused to tell the cops he was anyone except Ronald McDonald. Story 27. Most polarization and radicalism in the Western world on both sides is funded by Iran or Qatar or Russia or China, ranging from Samidun organizing pro-Palestine protests to Russia paying European politicians through the Voice of Europe network, to countries like Qatar, China, and Saudi Arabia, giving billions to U.S. universities, all combined by massive bot networks influencing online opinion. And the worst part is that some domestic groups eagerly participate in this foreign influence campaign. Story 28. I constantly beg people to read Heavy Radicals, the FBI's secret war on American Maoists. It goes into COINTELPRO and how the FBI was infiltrating various radical groups and political enemies. In this case, they infiltrated a group when there was less than a dozen members, built them up specifically because they were more radical than their counterparts, and then did all kinds of genuinely crazy crap to bring them down, intercepting and doctoring letters between leadership, antagonizing them against other groups, inciting illegal actions, where their undercover agents could identify the most willing and the up-and-coming leaders to either neuter them or have the wrong elements take over, etc. Black Against Empire is another book specifically going into the BPP that goes into this as well. At the forefront of every modern, progressive, and radical movement is either the FBI or CIA, so they can control it in a way that's advantageous to them and American hegemony. Story 29. I have always laughed at CTs, but some recent events trigger something in me, namely government opposers or threat to Russian government just falling out of windows. Certain individual with private island and influence and knowledge of a lot of world powers' shady, illegal doings ends up dying while in protective custody, and the info disappears later. A nation agitator and president race participant miraculously gets hit in the head Hollywood style from an experienced sniper, and so on and so forth. I can see how people get convinced there are conspiracies, and not all of them are entirely wrong. I love how on Pulse the boys are, as well as this cool Silo book series, in that the government throws made-up theories and controversies that seem so wild to hide stuff they are actually doing. As in, if it leaks, no one will believe the real things. Story 30. The ATF has several. During the Obama administration, they conducted a massive operation to smuggle guns into Mexico to sell them to local drug cartels. The premise was to track the exchanging of hands, but they conveniently lost track of every single gun sold. There also was that time that they murdered 75 people, including 25 children and 2 pregnant women, because there was concern their budget was going to be slashed, so they had to find a visible reason to be needed. They recently assassinated a public official under the guise of a no-knock raid they didn't need to conduct. Story 31. We're not alone. Non-human beings exist and are here on Earth, have been for 100s of years, and this is reported by many current and former government officials and citizen encounters. The living space ranges from underground, under the oceans, in space, and in different dimensions. Human governments reversed engineered their craft and have used the craft in very inhumane ways. People have been killed to hide this information. The beings are super intelligent beyond our own brain comprehension. The way they live and travel also goes beyond our own understanding. We've found craft in archaeological digs, bringing up the idea that everything we've been taught relating to human life/religion/evolution could be wrong. We have bodies. The beings range from hybrids, small grays, Nordics, aquatic, reptilian, and plasmoid. Story 32. Time travel. The United States Department of Defense declassified documents that consist of 30 pages on September 10, 2003 called The Gateway Experience, Phase 15, Travel into the Past, and Focus 21, Travel about the Future, based on evidence provided is attainable to achieve, but extremely difficult to reach, considering you have to master something called Focus 15. Based on those who were trialed, majority of them were able to reach Phase 15 or Focus 21. Quite interesting.